What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 15 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. So make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. And let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Real quick, before getting into our breakdown, a quick word from our partners at PrizePicks, which is our favorite DFS site of choice this NFL and fantasy football season. If you guys aren't familiar with them, do yourself a favor and check them out. In fact, when you sign up right now and use code ADP, you get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And look, we're already doing all this research for fantasy football matchups. So why not take advantage of it and get some profits as well? PrizePicks, well, they allow you to basically do exactly that. They have so many different player prop bets, not only in terms of single stat DFS, but also in terms of fantasy score. And you can combine them any which way you want. Super simple, super easy to use. All you have to do, choose two more players from the board, and then just pick the over-under on their projected fantasy score or on their single stat. Again, pretty much for every single matchup as the week progresses, those options will be updated even more so. And then the great thing is you've got two different options in terms of how you want to bet it, whether it's a flex play, so that way you can miss one of your selections but still win. Obviously, that's the safer choice. Or if you want more bang for your buck, check out the power play, where if you get all your picks correct, well, you win even bigger. So again, check all of that out. Details in the description. And we kick off Week 15 on Thursday with the Chiefs at the Chargers. On the Chiefs side of things, this is pretty simple. You go with Tyreek Hill. Now, yes, Hill didn't have a monster game this last week in a game where the Chiefs scored 40-plus points, but Patrick Mahomes only had 2 touchdowns in that game. So that kind of tells you all you need to know. I think this is going to be a much higher scoring affair from both sides here, from both teams. So we're going to see the top weapons a lot more involved, namely Tyreek Hill, namely Travis Kelce. I expect big days from both of those guys. I'm going to be fading Mecole Hardman, basically the rest of the wide receiver core for the Chiefs. This is the type of game where it's the stars that shine usually for the Chiefs. Tyreek Hill is somebody that I do like to have a big game. For the Chargers, a little bit more complicated here. Obviously, Keenan Allen didn't play last week due to COVID. He is back this week. He can play. But the question is, on a short week, what are you going to get from Keenan Allen in his first game back from COVID? That's always a concern. But there's a lot of different factors here. Now, Mike Williams is going to be a must start, and especially if Keenan Allen is maybe less than 100% physically, I think Mike Williams is actually the number one wide receiver in this specific game for the Chargers, so I really like him. But going back to Keenan Allen, even if he is less than 100%, there's also a possibility that Austin Eckler doesn't suit up in this game. He is such a big-time part of this offense. A lot of passes go his way, and if that does happen, I do think Keenan Allen will naturally see more targets. It's just one of those situations that's really tough to predict, but I think given the type of talent that Keenan Allen is, the high-scoring upside of this matchup, and how much Justin Herbert is going to have to pass the football and look to one of his favorite targets, I think you still have to start Keenan Allen. Yes, guys like Guyton and Josh Palmer were big fill-ins for the Chargers last week without Keenan Allen, but with him back, I wouldn't get too cute. I wouldn't chase the points. I would sit both of those guys. Moving on, we've got the Raiders at the Browns. As crazy as it sounds, Hunter Renfrow has become a wide receiver one in fantasy football, at least while Darren Waller has been out, and it's kind of trending in that similar direction yet again. In PPR formats, you gotta like his upside here, at least as, worst case scenario, a mid to high end wide receiver too. So you continue to fire up Renfrow. That's the easy part of the equation. For the Browns, right now, Cleveland is COVID central as far as NFL teams. Jarvis Landry is on the list. I do have him listed as a start because, theoretically there's a chance that he could play. But if, I had to guess, I'd say he probably doesn't, which means somebody like Donovan Peoples-Jones could be a sneaky start because the Browns are just horribly hit with COVID. Their tight ends, Jarvis Landry, DPJ is kind of the lone man standing. And I do think the Browns are going to have to, spread out the football, not only on the ground. I don't mind his opportunity here. I think he can be somebody it's, putting up low-end wide receiver 2 numbers. If Jarvis Landry does play somehow, then DPJ, his ceiling does go down. But honestly, I think he's probably the better play. And then I'd be sitting Bryan Edwards. I'd be sitting Deshaun Jackson. Even with their increased opportunities, it's been Hunter Renfrow that is still in the show for the Raiders. So sit both those guys. Moving on, Pats at the Colts. Only one name here that I really kind of have faith in, especially at a crucial time like this with the fantasy football playoffs starting. That's Michael Pittman. He's obviously kind of regressed as of late, and the Patriots do have a stingy defense, but I still have the most faith in him out of any other one of these wide receivers. Jacoby Myers, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne. Patriots aren't necessarily a pass-heavy team. There's a lot of touchdown dependency there. So I'd rather pass on them. Colts also have a stingy defense. And then don't get me started about T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal. They're kind of forgotten members of this offense. It's Michael Pittman. It's Jonathan Taylor. I don't think Jonathan Taylor is going to be able to do it all on his own. I look for Pittman to at least be able to put up 10 PPR points. Not a wide receiver 1, but I think low to mid-level wide receiver 2 on the week. Afterwards, Titans at the Steelers. Julio Jones is back. He's kind of the biggest name on this offense. Also one of the healthier names, as crazy as that sounds. I think he is the number 1 wide receiver as things stand at this point in time. And I think the Titans are going to have to air out the football versus the Steelers because without Derrick Henry, even though the Steelers are susceptible to the run, you just don't have that type of talent there in that backfield. So I think, again, Julio Jones, even though he's a big name, probably in the low-end wide receiver 2 category, I think he can get you at least 10 fantasy points as kind of a floor for the Steelers. Feel much better here about Deontay Johnson. Also Chase Claypool. I would say, Claypool has similar type of upside as Julio Jones, but a higher floor. So I really like both of those guys. Johnson, the preferred option behind wide receiver 2, even wide receiver 1 upside. And then I wouldn't get too cute here with the Titans' remaining wide receivers, Westbrook or Chester Rogers. Tannehill has been disappointing enough to begin with. So if I'm taking a chance on anyone, it would be Julio Jones only. Moving on, Panthers at the Bills. For the Panthers, I'd only start DJ Moore, but I do want to expand on this because I think this is a game where the Panthers are going to be down big pretty quickly. And the question that I have is who's going to be the quarterback? If it's Cam Newton, then I would take a chance on Robbie Anderson because I think Cam Newton is going to air it out more so than a PJ Walker, who I have zero faith in. If it's PJ Walker, I would sit Robbie Anderson, and that's the assumption that I'm going with at the moment. For the Bills, it's much easier here. Stephon Diggs, fire him up. Cole Beasley with Emmanuel Sanders banged up, not expected to play in week 15. I also like Cole Beasley. I think both these guys will put up decent fantasy numbers and are the preferred, fantasy wide receiver targets in this game. Then Washington at the Eagles. Really only 2 names here. For the Eagles, it's always Devonta Smith. Let's move on. For Washington, this is tough. Terry McLaurin has put, a back-to-back awful games. He's questionable to begin with. On top of that, Heineke got banged up, even though, disclaimer, I think Kyle Allen is a better quarterback than Heineke, and he can air it out more so and better than Heineke, and that would be better for McLaurin. But, McLaurin's just one of those guys that I think you have to start because the upside is tremendous. I think he's kind of that Tyler Lockett category, even though his quarterback is nowhere near as good. But you start him. The Eagles matchup isn't all that scary. Obviously, that's if Terry McLaurin plays, but he's obviously, like right now, one of the poster boys for boom or bust. If you need the upside, you play him, but just know what it comes with. And then I wouldn't get too cute here. Cam Sims, Adam Humphries, some guys that got attention last week. If McLaurin doesn't play, who do I go with, if anyone at all? I'd probably give the slight edge to Humphries, mainly in PPR formats. But again, I don't think the upside is all that huge. I think you're going to be like hoping and praying for at least 10 fantasy points. So honestly, not ideal in terms of fantasy wide receivers in this game. Then Texans at the Jaguars. I'm only sticking to the big names here. I have more faith in Brandin Cooks because He's on the Texans side of things, and not that the Texans are world beaters or a great team, but how do I put this nicely? The Jaguars are idiots. Urban Meyer is a moron, and he needs to get the hell out of Jacksonville. He's ruining that franchise. He's ruining Trevor Lawrence. He's ruining James Robinson. The list goes on and on and on. So as great of a matchup as this is, because both these teams are atrocious defensively, I don't have all that much faith in the Jaguars wide receivers because, on paper, this should be a big James Robinson game, and this group of wide receivers is kind of inconsistent to begin with, so I'd only look at Marvin Jones. I think both these guys are kind of in the low-end wide receiver 2 category, maybe a little bit lower, but I do like the upside of Brandin Cooks more so. I wouldn't go chasing, the targets, the volume with Nico Collins, what he did last week, because similar to the Jaguars, I think the Texans are going to focus on rushing the football, and then I wouldn't go with Laviska Shenault here for the Jaguars either. Again, only 2 names, Cooks, Marvin Jones. Moving on, Cowboys at the Giants. Only looking at the Cowboys side of things. The 3 guys, them, Lamb, Cooper, Gallup. I think it's a situation where they can all at least get you 10 fantasy points in PPR formats. So, give you some flex appeal, and then I would say Lamb and Cooper have the higher upsides. So I wouldn't mind starting all of these guys. For the Giants, it's tough for you to trust this offense when it's Daniel Jones. Then when it's Mike Glennon, I would say forget about it. Shepard, whether it was a situation kind of like his first game from injury, quarterback instability, I don't know what it is, but he just didn't produce last week. Kenny Golladay has been one of the most disappointing free agent pickups all season long. I would sit both those guys, just absolutely zero faith in Glennon. Okay, one of them could be viable to have a good outing, but which one is it? Could even be, someone completely different out of this pass-catching group, so I'm fading the Giants. Then Cardinals at the Lions. So DeAndre Hopkins is obviously the big name, but he has an asterisk next to him because he is getting an MRI. If he doesn't play, then I think it could be a big, big week for A.J. Green and Christian Kirk because guess what? James Conner, running back for the Cardinals, also getting an MRI. So some big names for the Cardinals here, potential question marks. And if so, Green and Kirk could be huge, huge pickups. For the Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown was a name that we were kind of bringing up at the beginning of the season during fantasy football mock drafts, and he's kind of finally starting to shine, getting more exposure, getting more volume. And out of all these wide receivers for the Lions, he's the one that I would go with. If TJ Hawkinson returns in this game, the tight end for the Lions, I'd be sitting the other wide receivers. If he doesn't, if DeAndre Swift is also still gone, then maybe Josh Reynolds could be a flyer. But again, I wouldn't push it too much. I would say even Amon-Ra St. Brown is kind of a risky pick to begin with. Then Jets at the Dolphins. I'm only looking at Jaylen Waddle here. Even with Devontae Parker, back, and this being the Jets, Waddle is the preferred option for me. I think he's a mid to high-end wide receiver too, as has been the case pretty much all season long. For the Jets, Elijah Moore isn't available. Braxton Berrios had a big game last week, but again, I don't trust this offense. I don't trust Zach Wilson. I don't trust the consistency at the wide receiver position. I'm sitting the 2 big names, presumably the 2 healthy names, in Berrios and Crowder. And then I'm also sitting Devontae Parker because I do think at one point in time this game could get away from the Jets and the Dolphins just start rushing the football with whoever it is. So something to keep in mind. I don't necessarily think there's going to be 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers in this game. Afterwards, Bengals at the Broncos. Only really like the Bengals side of it because it's a lot more predictable. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, I think both those guys are kind of low-end wide receiver 2s with decent touchdown upside. And then I would be fading Tyler Boyd. Again, I think just too many mouths to feed. For the Broncos, okay, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick. One of these guys is probably going to have a big game. But again, as I've been saying for the last several weeks, which one is it going to be? It's an absolute coin flip. And the possibility of all of them busting is also very possible. I think this is a complete guessing game, and for fantasy purposes, especially again during the first round of the fantasy football playoffs, you just avoid the Broncos wide receivers altogether. Then Falcons at the 49ers. For the Falcons, Russell Gage is mainly the only Falcons wide receiver kind of worth mentioning. I wouldn't mind taking a chance on him. He's been pretty decent these last couple of weeks, kind of flying under the radar. I think he's a low-end wide receiver too. For the 49ers, Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Samuel returned this last week. He didn't get his normal usage. I expect that to increase this week. But Brendan Ayuk, he had a lot of opportunities as the George Kittle at tight end. I anticipate, some of those opportunities for Ayuk to go down, but Ayuk should still be involved in this game. I think he is a decent start. Then we go to the Seahawks at the Rams, and talking about another team that is absolutely being killed with COVID cases. Looking at the Rams, Odell Beckham got put on the COVID list. It could very well be a situation where Van Jefferson and Cooper Kupp also show up on that list. That would be awful. If all these guys play, I would feel okay starting all of them. I think they have over 10 fantasy points, upside in terms of their floor. So, okay, that's if they all play. For the Seahawks, Tyler Lockett has become the more, kind of consistent wide receiver. But as disappointing as Metcalf has been, the Rams are also being hit with COVID on the defensive side of things. I think Metcalf can kind of bounce back here, and it's a similar situation. He's a big name, incredibly talented. I think you kind of got to start him because Russell Wilson getting a little bit better and better. I could see high scoring upside here. So I'd start him, but just realize that he is boomer bust and in the low-end wide receiver 2 category. Afterwards, Packers at the Ravens. I'll go with Devontae Adams. That's the easy part. And then I might actually take a flyer on Allen Lazard as kind of that flex wide receiver 2. Without Randall Cobb, he's getting more opportunities, and I do think he has all right touchdown upside. I think he can get you 10 fantasy points. For the Ravens, it's Marquise Brown. I don't trust Rashad Bateman. I don't trust Sammy Watkins at the moment. And then Marquez Valdes-Scantling, kind of that third name for the Packers. I would be fading him. And then Saints at the Bucks. I'm only looking at the Saints, Bucks side of it. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Yes, I know Evans has struggled historically versus the Saints, but with Taysom Hill under center, this is a completely different team. It's going to have a trickle-down effect. Antonio Brown is still gone. I like Evans. I do like Godwin more so, but I think both of them are mid to high-end wide receiver 2s. For the Saints, with Taysom Hill, he's kind of benefited with easier opponents. I think that the Bucks are going to absolutely stop the Saints in this game. I have zero faith in Hill's arm, and I already don't have faith in the wide receiver, so I'm sitting pretty much every single wide receiver you can think of here on the Saints side of things. And then finally, Vikings at the Bears. Justin Jefferson, you start him. That's the easy part. He's a wide receiver 1. If Adam Thielen returns, which there are talks he could, then I would start him. I think he's a high-end wide receiver 2. For the Bears, it's only Darnell Mooney, Allen Robinson. He just doesn't want to be in Chicago. He's, at this point, kind of mailed it in. And it's tough to trust him. I don't trust this passing offense all that much. I don't trust the coaching all that much. And it just hasn't been there with Allen Robinson. Mooney is the guy that I would much rather take a chance on. Again, he's not in the wide receiver 1 category. He's not even in the high-end wide receiver 2 category. But I think he can be somebody low to mid-level wide receiver 2 on the week. And with that, we wrap up our Week 15 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. As always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe. Give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. In the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.